I saw, after about 10 minutes of the movie, an usher come hustling down the aisle and pull somebody out.
Hi, folks. Steven here. I'm on the phone with Michael Haigney, who was part of the localization team for the first couple seasons of Pokémon. And Michael, we just have some questions to go through. First of all, where are you from? And how'd you get into the entertainment industry?
Well, it's nice to talk to you, Stephen. I am from Brooklyn, New York, and that's where I'm talking to you from now. I lived in Manhattan for a while, but I'm back in Brooklyn for many years. How did I get into the entertainment industry? I was on my school newspaper, and a girl that was in my on the paper worked in the student placement center. And I said, Liz, if you get any jobs that pay a lot of money, very little work, and lots of glamour and excitement, let me know. I got 2 out of 3. I got a page job at the CBS Broadcast Center in New York on 57th Street while I was going to Fordham University. And from there, I met producers and a lot of friends who eventually went on to work in the entertainment field. And that's where I've gotten basically all of my jobs. I only went on one job interview in my life, really, and that was the page job. And from there on, it was working with people that I had worked with or known really from CBS, pretty much.
And then what were some of your first shows or other projects that you worked on there?
Well, originally, at CBS, I was an usher on shows, but then I worked in different offices. I worked in the office of a producer and director who was very big in game shows. His name was Mike Gargiulo. He just sadly died this year, and he had been a director on Password and a bunch of game shows over the years, $25,000 Pyramid, and a whole bunch of them. And he was at that time producing and directing live events for CBS, New Year's Eve shows, and parades, Thanksgiving Parade, Cotton Bowl, Rose Bowl Parade. And I worked with him on those live events for several years. And from there, I went to doing some promos for movie packages, and from there to a syndication company where we did specials like Horror Hall of Fame, which were 2-hour award specials that we did for 3 years. I did a series with alternative music called Music Scoop, which was hosted by Kelly Ripa. And we did pilots for soap shows and all different skating competition show. And from there, I went to doing anime adaptations.
Yeah, you worked on a show called Slayers, which actually a fair number of Pokemon people were on at one point or another. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, the reason that I started working actually in localization, or I call adaptation of series, was that we did a sports competition show called Blade Warriors. At that time, inline skating was a big deal, and this was like, if you remember American Gladiators, this was like American Gladiators on skates. And we'd film we'd tape these competitions in this big hangar out in Santa Monica, and then brought them back to New York and had the hosts do the commentary. So we didn't do it live; we did it after the fact. So I was essentially writing their ad libs, writing their commentary. And a brother of a guy I had worked with said, "Hey, I usually put new music on old cartoons, and they leave the voices. But this company wants me to put voices on cartoons, but not the music. And you do that, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And that was Slayers. And you're right. A number of people who worked on both Here is Greenwood and on Slayers, eventually we cast in the Pokémon series.
So how did you personally get involved with the series? Obviously, you knew some folks there, but what was the specific people involved?
Well, as I said, I worked at an ad agency, and then the ad agency that was hired by a syndication company called Select Media hired me and the Mark Juris, who worked with me. I worked with him. We worked together both. They did a show called In Sport, which was like a kind of a cross between Entertainment Tonight and a sports show. And that was directed by Norman Grossfeld. And so I worked with Norman Grossfeld, who then eventually became the president of 4Kids. Then when when 4Kids got the license for Pokémon and had the job of localizing the show for America and English-speaking territories, he needed somebody to do that. And because I had been he knew I was, I stayed in touch with Norman. He knew I had done that on Slayers. And so he called me and he said, we're doing this series about kids, and they have these battling creatures. And at that time, it sort of clicked with me, and I said, "Is this the show that's been in the news that sent all those kids in Japan to the hospital?" Because that was a big news event back then. And he said, "Yeah, but we're not going to show that episode." And that's that Porygon episode that a lot of fans always ask me about. And so that's how I started doing it. And then I did a bunch of other series too. But Pokemon, of course, was the big hit.
So what was the actual technical process there in those early days? What did you actually do from a video standpoint?
Well, we would get I would get a time-coded VHS of each episode, and I would also get a script from the translator that the 4Kids had hired. His name was Paul Taylor, and they would give me a script with all the dialogue as a kind of direct translation from the Japanese. I don't like to say literal because all translations are sort of an interpretation, but anyway, a direct translation of the Japanese script. And then I would have an in and an out for each line of dialogue with a time code number. And then at that time, because nothing was digital then, or as far as the video wasn't digital, it was, I had a VHS machine and a remote control that would go forward and backward. And so I would go line by line, writing the script, and trying to read what I had written, so that they would match the flaps, the mouth movements of the characters. And then we worked at that time for the first season. We worked at a sound studio called Buttons Sound in Midtown Manhattan, and we worked, and we would bring each actor in. They would do all their lines in that episode, and sometimes more than one episode. And then we bring the next actor in, and we would go, okay, the first one is on page 4. It's whatever the time code was. We do that line, and then we just go through the episodes and build them up like that with the individual actors.
You also did a few character voices. Which ones were those, and what was that kind of like?
Well, I've just recently started a podcast called Original Pokeman, and it's about my memories of doing the series. I go back episode by episode, and each one I'm kind of discovering the characters that I did. All in all, going down the list of the characters that I remember, I've done between around 30 or 35, maybe 40, possibly a few more than that. I did a lot of the Pokemon, mostly Pokemon characters, but I also did a lot of the fans remember Blaine, the gym trainer from one of the episodes in early season, and I would do occasionally, an incidental character here or there. But mostly the characters that stand out are Charmander, Psyduck, Snorlax, Cubone, on and on and on.
Yeah, that Snorlax one in particular, you've gotten a lot of mileage out of. I believe that voice sample is still used in the modern Super Smash Brothers games when Snorlax comes out of the Pokeball there. So even some of the younger listeners at home should recognize that one.
Yeah, I've been going to conventions and signing autographs, and I've just got back from one. I met hundreds and hundreds of people, and they all ask about Charmander and Psyduck, but boy, Snorlax is so popular, and it's the one voice. It's one of the voices that, because I used to do it, and then we would pitch it down a couple of semitones to make it kind of much more resonant. But it's like but kind of a little deeper and longer than that. So it's a little disappointing, especially in noisy convention centers. When I do that, I kind of have to make a megaphone with my hands to get a little bit of the effect. But a lot of the voices that I did for the series are also used in some of the games. I wasn't until recently aware that they're still being used in very, very recent games.
Yeah, that's really neat how something you did that long ago is still making waves.
Yeah.
So what was it kind of like being part of that, speaking of waves, that first wave of the franchise and when it actually started coming out and started really getting traction in the West? What was that kind of like for you?
Yeah, that people ask me that at the conventions too. we at the very beginning, I thought, wow, I don't think this series is going to last, because it was very different from what was on broadcast television. Kids animated series that were on broadcast television. They had a lot of emotion. There were some, kind of down moments, and the lead of the series was not always winning, and it was just kind of different. It looked different, and but pretty quickly, because it had the cards and it had the games, it was, if anybody was around at that time, I mean, it was on the covers of, Newsweek or Time. I think Time and Newsweek. I'm not sure. I know it was on TV Guide. A couple of they did 4 different TV Guide covers with Pikachu, and I think Psyduck and Charmander, and I forget the other one. So I was on 2 covers of TV Guide. It's sort of the characters I voiced anyway. But it was a huge thing, and of course the cards were crazy. I mean, the kids were going crazy for the cards, and we were certainly aware of that. But the thing was, it was a very busy job, and at the beginning, I was not only adapting the series, but I was directing the actors, and I was also using voicing a lot of the characters as well. So really the first times that I was very aware of it was riding on the subway and seeing the kids say, "Hey, I got a Charmander," and that kind of thing. And the really big experience was when the first movie came out. I went to California for one of the premieres at, I think it was Grauman's Chinese Theater then, but it could have been Mann's Chinese, with the cement prints of all these stars there. It was completely packed. It's a huge theater. And when that Pokeball popped out at the beginning, in the opening credit, the crowd went crazy. And I remember 2 other things. A couple of rows ahead of us was David Hasselhoff and one of his children, I presume. And it was the first time I saw, and after about 10 minutes of the movie, an usher come hustling down the aisle and pull somebody out. And it was somebody had a camcorder, and they were trying to pirate the movie before it was even open. But, by that time, we knew that it was this huge, phenomenal hit, and it was just really, really, a big success. But we didn't really have a lot of contact with the fans. The fan mail would go mostly to Nintendo or to the stations. But so it was one of those shows that really had so much, and still has a lot of resonance for kids who grew up with it, who are now adults and have children of their own.
Yeah, the cycle, we're starting to see it come full circle in the last few years, so that's been really neat. Now, you had said that in the early days you were on like VHS tapes and stuff like that. During your time working on the series, did things get more advanced as we sort of turned into the new millennium? How did that progress?
Yeah, I think just from the really technical, I think we were using DATs. Remember the DAT tapes that were originally, I believe we were recording on DAT. Or they were using Pro Tools, I think, at Buttons. And then after the first season, the company that I was in partnership with Larry Juris for Taj Productions. And so we built this studio in our office. So because at that time, when I had started in TV, when you mixed shows, you had to go to someplace in the Brill Building or someplace in California where we mix, where they just a few. There were a lot of places, but they had these gigantic mixing boards, and it was very expensive. But by that time, the miniaturization of everything, that we could have a setup in our office to record in a booth that we had built. So it even changed from like the first season to the second season, technology-wise.
All right. Well, you did work on a couple other 4Kids shows in that era. What were they, and what was that like?
Well, after, as I said, Larry and I had this company, and so I had an opportunity to work for 4Kids, and they still were using Taj to do Pokémon, but that once the show was established, they were now branching out and adapting and broadcasting more shows. So I started after Pokémon. I went to Kirby. It was called Kirby Right Back at You. I did a few seasons of that. Then after that, I worked on Sonic X, sticking with the video game kind of thing. Did a couple seasons of that. For a very short time, very few episodes, but it did air, I believe, another video game called F-Zero. Mm-hmm. After that, we did the 4Kids, wanted to do an original thing, so they partnered with a creator in Scandinavia, and we did an original series for 3 seasons called Chaotic, and that had a card game and a video game element as well. And then and a couple of little other things that I did, but the last one was a Korean show called Tai Chi Chasers, which I understand just came out on DVD from Amazon. But that was the last original. And then after that, I worked as a freelancer adapting for Yu-Gi-Oh!, Arc V, and Zexal. And since then, I've been working on the podcast and also now started going to fan conventions. And that's really been, that's really where I get the fan feedback. After all these years, it's incredible, that I did the show so many years ago. And now people are getting to, I'm getting to meet a lot of people in person, and they've been so super nice about their memories, particularly about Pokemon, but sometimes the other shows too.
Yeah, you had mentioned your podcast in here. So you have a podcast called The Original Pokeman. And,
Original Pokeman. Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm.
And it's where you sort of go over episode by episode. You're about to release, as we're recording this, the Waterflowers of Cerulean City. That's, I believe episode 7 is going to come out hopefully by the time folks are hearing this, if not hopefully shortly thereafter. But and you go through, you sort of explain some of the decisions you made, you defend some of them, maybe mea culpa a little bit on some of them.
Oh, definitely, definitely. I hope I'm not too defensive. That's what I've been thinking about recently, because I understand all the criticisms that they had, and I did understand them at the time. We had a lot of people who are really into, the original anime, and are deeply offended and angered by a lot of the changes that I made on Pokemon, but on other series too, but mostly Pokemon. And I always did understand it. I felt my job was to Americanize the show, and I did that to varying degrees of success. I hope it was mostly successful. But in the early days, a lot of the letters that I would get seemed to be the negative ones. So I'm used to that, and I understand it, and I empathize with it. I sympathize with it, and I explain, and I hope I'm not too defensive in the podcast, but I do try to explain the decisions and why I made them and why people hate them.
Yeah, it's always a bit of a mixed bag. You mentioned in some of the episodes that, there's standards and practices, stuff that would not fly on American television or maybe even in some other countries. But what sort of prompted you to start that podcast?
To be honest, I had nothing better to do. That's one reason. The other reason was that when I became aware that that some of the people connected with Pokemon we're doing, podcast, not podcasts necessarily, but appearances and stuff. But I watched a few before doing the podcast, and actually before deciding to do the podcast. And there were a couple of things that people said that I remembered much differently than they did. And so I'm not saying I'm setting the record straight with my podcast, Original Pokeman, but I'm saying that these are my memories. And I just thought I'd get my 2 cents in there too, because I had kind of a different, I won't say unique, but I guess it was unique in that I was an actor. I wasn't really in management, but I directed the shows, but I was also, so it wasn't really from the actor's perspective. It wasn't really from the corporate perspective. It was somewhere sort of in another place. So I thought it was just a little bit different and might be interesting to some people who are still interested in the show.
Why don't you pick out one tidbit from one of your episodes that you think will get people interested in your show?
Oh, my gosh. Well, I don't presume that everyone would be interested, but I guess in an upcoming episode, famous, I didn't really know it was that famous, but there are 2 things. There's a line that I have that people apparently, it's like a meme, which I didn't know this until about 6 months ago, that where the kids are running in the rain and they're trying to get out, and kids and Pikachu are running, and Brock has a frying pan, and he says, "I'm going to use this frying pan as a drying pan." And people seem to like that line for some reason. But of course, the notorious one is the decision to change the rice balls, the onigiri, from rice balls to jelly donuts. And so that's something, the backstory of that is something that I hope the lovers and the haters can enjoy when I get to it. But there is a little bit of a backstory there, and I hope that might be interesting.
All right, definitely something to look forward to. So, where can folks find you online? You have a website, or what else?
My podcast is called Original Pokeman, and you can get it where, Spotify, Google, iTunes, any place where people ignore podcasts. And my email address is originalpokeman@gmail.com. And once I figure out how to get my own web page for the podcast, I'll let you know. I'm just trying to get the episodes out.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Michael. It's been great having you on.
It's been nice talking to you, Stephen. And all I'll say is, Charmander.
All right, folks. Thanks.
Sigh.